Inside the cabin, the air smelled of stale pine and cold iron. Silas Thorne sat at the workbench, his thumb tracing the jagged rim of a chipped ceramic mug. The coffee inside was stone cold, leaving a dark, oily ring against the white glaze. It was a quiet life, or at least he told himself it was. The whispering wilds didn't talk back, and the Aegis perimeter was 1,000 light years of silence away. Then the sky tore open. A jagged streak of violet light cut through the canopy, followed by a tremor that made the floorboards groan. Silas didn't hesitate. He didn't reach for a radio. He reached for his field satchel and a heavy coat. Old habits didn't just die. They waited in the marrow of the bone for a reason to wake up. The crater was a masterpiece of unintended geometry. The soil had been scorched into a perfect, blackened spiral, as if the impact had been choreographed. In the center lay the wreckage, silver hull plating curved like the ribs of a fallen god. And beneath a jagged shard of metal, something moved. Subscribe to witness the survival of the human spirit in the furthest reaches of the stars. Let us continue. Silas cleared the debris with a grunt. He expected a pilot, perhaps a smuggler from the outer rim. Instead, he found a woman with skin the color of starlight and eyes like liquid mercury. She didn't scream. Her pupils simply contracted into needle points, and her skin began to radiate a faint, rhythmic heat that Silas felt against his palms. Her left leg was mangled, dark violet fluid soaking into the moss. "Easy," Silas muttered, pulling a roll of industrial sealant tape from his kit. "I'm not the one you're running from." He worked with clinical efficiency. The sealant tape hissed as it met the wound, cauterizing the breach with a chemical sting, which meant the null sensors. Silas froze. A low, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the soles of his boots. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of a logic gate seeking an answer. Above the trees, a dark, spindly shape blotted out the moons. A null hunter drone. Its red search beam flickered through the branches, a lethal crimson eye looking for the heat signature he had just accidentally amplified. The woods are listening. Join us as we navigate the whispering wilds and see what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted. Silas scooped her up. She was lighter than she looked, her body vibrating with a high-frequency tremor. The drone's beam swept over the spiral crater, missing them by inches. Silas knew the terrain. He knew the gap between the twin boulders where the moss grew thickest. "Hold your breath," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if she breathed the same air he did. The machine roared. It was a sound of grinding metal and digital hunger. Silas felt the heat of its engines on the back of his neck as he slid into the dark, narrow crevice of his bunker. He slammed the emergency hatch shut, the squeaky floorboard beneath his heel giving its familiar, rhythmic protest. Darkness swallowed them, save for the faint mercury glow of the stranger's eyes. The air inside the bunker was thick with ozone and the rhythmic, hollow tap-tap-tap of a condensation pipe dripping onto the stone floor. Silas checked the readout on his sensor tool, his thumb brushing the jagged edge of the industrial sealant tape he had used to patch the scanner's casing earlier that morning. It was a small, mundane sound, the kind of domestic noise that usually meant safety. Now it felt like a countdown. Alara leaned against the wall, her mercury eyes tracking Silas with a piercing, analytical intensity. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she traced a series of symbols on his digital tablet. The translation software hummed, struggling with the melodic syntax of her warning. The null, the fleet eradication. The star map she drew wasn't just a flight path. It was a harvest aimed straight at the heart of the Aegis perimeter. Silas stared at the glowing trajectory. Terra Nova was merely the first obstacle in a path of calculated destruction. And if Alara was... He cut the thought short. Speculation was a luxury. He pried open the storage crate, revealing the forbidden plasma core battery. It pulsed with an unstable violet light that cast long, flickering shadows against the reinforced walls. "Watch the door," Silas said, his voice dropping into a low, clinical rasp. He began stripping wires with a jagged knife, explaining the process more to steady his own hands than for her benefit. The physics of the core were simple but violent. by bypassing the magnetic containment field and forcing a direct feedback loop into the cooling vents. He could turn the battery into a localized supernova that would strip the atoms from any synthetic hull within 30 yards. It was a dirty, desperate way to fight. He lashed the core to a thermal food pack using the industrial sealant tape, his fingers working with a frantic, muscle memory precision that ignored the stinging chemical burns and the distant, bone-shaking vibrations of the null drones currently systematically dismantling the forest canopy above their heads. "It's ready," he muttered. They moved through the narrow crawl tunnel. Silas left the decoy beacon active, a pulsing heat signature designed to lure the hunter into the kill zone. They emerged behind a screen of ancient, wet roots, the air tasting like rain and impending fire. The null hunter descended. It was a spindly nightmare of matte black alloy, its red eye locked onto the bunker's ventilation shaft. It landed with a heavy, metallic thud that vibrated through the earth. Silas gripped the remote trigger, his knuckles white. The world went white. The explosion wasn't a roar. It was a sudden, absolute absence of sound. A sphere of violet energy expanded and collapsed in a heartbeat, leaving nothing but a smoldering, spiral-patterned crater where the bunker had been. The drone didn't just break. It unraveled into glowing dust. They didn't wait to watch the wreckage cool. They ran for the ridge, toward the rusted skeleton of the old signal tower. Silas slammed the master override switch, sending a raw, unencrypted burst of data into the atmosphere. The Aegis Perimeter Defense Network blinked awake. High above, the night sky began to pulse with the rhythmic fire of orbital cannons answering the call. Silence reclaimed the ridge as the last null scout vanished in a streak of atmospheric fire, a final, desperate spark. Silas stood by the transmitter, his hand resting on the empty roll of industrial sealant tape that had saved them both. In the cold vacuum of deep space, the null fleet paused, recalibrating as they processed a variable they had never encountered. Silas looked at the mercury-eyed girl and saw only the reflection of the next war. Come back tomorrow for the next chapter of humanity's stand against the unknown. We'll be here,